You're listening to Good Girls Finish Broke, the podcast for successful single moms ready to rebel against the version of single motherhood built on struggle, sacrifice, and survival. Because broke isn't always a bank balance. Sometimes it's the cost of living a life shaped by other people's rules and opinions instead of the life you actually want. And that is why Good Girls Finish Broke. I'm Angela Lynn, psychology-trained coach helping single moms break out of survival patterns and create their rich life with more wealth, freedom, time, and energy. This podcast is about breaking cycles and rewriting what it means to be a single mom, because around here, single motherhood isn't the limitation, it's the catalyst. Welcome to the rebellion. Hey girl, welcome back to Good Girls Finish Broke. Today I want to talk to you about leaving my 9-to-5 last August to pursue my business full time. I'm going to take you through how I knew it was time to go, how I arrived at that decision, what I did to prepare, what came up for me through that process and how I worked through it, and what it actually takes to build a life that you're obsessed with based on the vision that you have for your own life and not what society says we get to be, do, and have as single moms. I am going to be spilling the tea on the behind the scenes, and I'm so excited for this conversation. This is not going to be the story where I tell you I've got it all figured out, or I was able to replace my 9-to-5 income overnight, or that it's all easy now. But that's why this conversation is so important right now, because I'm still very much in the messy middle. I'm still figuring things out as I go, and I want to demonstrate for you that we don't have to have every possible outcome planned for before we make a major move. So let's start with the tea. Up until August of last year, I had worked for child welfare with the state of Oregon for almost 9 years. That job was pivotal for me getting back on my feet as a new single mom. I accepted a position there when my daughter was just a year old, and she grew up kind of as a mascot in the office running down the rows between the cubicles. The job offered financial stability, excellent government benefits, a great retirement package, and it was everything that I needed at that season of my life to get my feet back under myself. The first 4 years, I was a social worker, so I was actively working with families on helping them to reunify with their children that had entered the foster care system. And the last 5 years, I worked in family engagement. And so I would bring family members, parents, attorneys, CASAs, caseworkers, all the legal parties around the table to have a really clear conversation on what the parents needed to do for their children to come back home. This work was super meaningful to me, as you can imagine, starting the meeting with parents that were anxious, confused about what they needed to be doing, and then ending the meeting with clarity around their next steps and a teamwork approach for their kids to come home. I absolutely loved this position. Over the years, various other responsibilities were added to that role, and over time, it became further and further away from what I understood the true intent of that role was, which was directly impacting reunification efforts between kids and their parents. And with each change, I could feel this nagging response from my body that was just an absolute no. But I was too scared to make the leap until June, when my manager contacted me and said, "Hey, we're making some additional changes to the role. I'd love to schedule a meeting with you for this week so we can go over those." And the physical response that I had was just an absolute full body hell no. And I knew in that moment it was time for me to make the transition out of the agencies. What came up for me was a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of fear. I wasn't ready. I hadn't been preparing specifically for this, despite knowing for years that I didn't want to be with the agency forever. I knew that I couldn't ignore the urge to leave anymore. And so I allowed all of this discomfort to bubble up. I called my aunt in tears and I said, I can't do it anymore. I recognized that the changes that they made supported the agency goals and vision. And as a business owner myself, I respect that 100%. What I recognized when I allowed myself to actually sit with the idea of leaving was that the agency had become the most chaotic part of my life, which shouldn't be a surprise in crisis work, but for my nervous system, for my heart and soul, I recognized that it was time for me to move on. I was so grateful for what the agency had provided to my daughter and I knew it was time to go for more. And I want you to follow along with me here because this is so important. We have been conditioned by a society that tells us if we want more, then we must not feel gratitude for what we currently have. Both can be true. They don't cancel each other out. And I was infinitely grateful for what that position had afforded me. And knew it was time for more. The first thing I needed to do was regulate my nervous system. My brain was having an absolute heyday, telling me how irresponsible I'm being, telling me how reckless I'm being, that I'm not prepared, that this isn't the time, that why wouldn't I want to retire with the state like so many people do? And side note, I can't tell you how many people have told me over the years of me working with the agency, oh, I wish I had a government job. I bet those benefits are excellent. Your retirement package is going to be great. And the shame that I would feel knowing from day one of being hired that I was never going to be a lifelong employee with the state. So I had a lot that I was working through. So after speaking with my aunt and regulating my nervous system, I replied to my manager and said, let's meet. When we met a few days later, I thanked her for the information and let her know that I wouldn't be the one carrying out those new tasks because at this point, I recognized it was time for me to transition out of the agency. I gave a 30-day notice so that they had an opportunity to post my position, hire for it, include me in the interviews if they wanted to, and to help ease the transition of me going out and someone new coming in. And what happened over the course of those 30 days from when I gave my notice to when I actually left felt like an incredible ego death. Everything that I had known about the safety and the security of that position was falling away to pursue full-time entrepreneurship, which felt batshit crazy and terrifying. I think I cried more in those 30 days than I did in the whole 5 years leading up to that moment. As far as planning goes, the first thing that I did was see how much money I had available to me and how far I could make that stretch before I knew I either needed to replace my 9 to 5 income or take on a new job. And that felt like the most risky part. I knew that I didn't have a tremendous amount of time worth of finances saved to carry us. I had about 6 months. But what I knew I did have, which you have too, was the determination and the grit to figure it out along the way. I have an abundance of evidence, and I know that you do too, of my ability to figure shit out. I have figured everything out up until this very point in my life, and I will continue to do so. I have enough trust in myself and in my intuition that when she said, girl, it's time to leave this job, it was time to go. In reality, I'd just been putting it off because of the fear. And my brain was just doing what brains do. Our brains want to keep us safe, and the unknown feels super risky. It's important to recognize that there are major misconceptions around single motherhood and our ability to tolerate risk. Being a single mom doesn't inherently mean that we can't tolerate risk. It just means that our relationship to risk has to also include self-trust, planning, and a great deal of nervous system regulation so that we're not making decisions based on fear, but on the vision that we have for the life that we're creating. Because creating our dream life, guys, takes something of us. We have to be willing to show up as the version of ourselves that's living the life that we want. And I knew that as long as I was working in this high stress environment, exposing myself to vicarious trauma on a daily basis, I was never going to get to the version of the life that I actually wanted to be living. So as far as the planning goes, it was pretty minimal, or maybe more minimal than what you would expect for such a major life transition. But here's the thing. I could plan out every single possible outcome, of which there are infinite. And all that's going to do is keep me from making the move. When you get stuck in this planning mode, oh, what if this happens? But then what if that? And then what if I do this? But then what about that? We could think about these possibilities forever. But I knew that working in that high stress environment was costing me more than I was willing to continue to pay. So it was time to bet on myself. Did I feel ready? Absolutely not. Was I scared? Girl, I was terrified. But did I do it anyway? You bet your ass I did. Because I know that that is what is required of me to create the life that I want. I've been working for the majority of my life on listening to my intuition, identifying what is intuition versus fear, and acting on my intuition even when it doesn't make sense instead of acting on the fear. And this is one of the biggest examples of that for me, but it wasn't the only example. I already had evidence to indicate that things work out when I follow my intuition. Like when I moved from Portland, where I was born and raised in my early 20s, to Seattle, without a job and $1,000 in my bank account. Or the time that I left my job at Seattle Children's Hospital and moved back to Oregon at 7 months pregnant without a job, without any prospects, and without much of a plan, moving into motherhood, or the time that I ended my relationship with my daughter's dad at just 8 weeks postpartum with no income, no working vehicle, and no idea how it was going to work out, but just knowing that it would. And I know that you have examples of times where you've moved before you were ready and it worked out for you too. Now, I'm not telling you if you have a dream and a vision that you should quit your job right now. I mean, I'm not telling you that. But what I am saying is that it's important to recognize so many of the limitations that we have are self-imposed, or they are adopted from the limitations of society and what society says that we get to be, do, and have as single moms. The best thing you can do for yourself is rebel against the limitations that society has given us and identify where you have adopted those into your own life, where you're living out of alignment with the life that you actually want to be living. And for so many of us, we don't even spend time dreaming about what that life could be because of these limitations. Now, I know in single motherhood, it can feel like you're just treading water, that you're barely getting ahead just to fall behind again. And it's important for you to recognize where you might be unnecessarily leaking resources because your life is still organized around survival. If you're in a season where you can tell that the life you're living and the life you want are no longer matching, I want you to know that you don't have to have the full plan figured out before you execute just that very first next step. In fact, I would recommend that you don't. We can get into planning paralysis, which I spoke a little bit about before. You'll always know the next step. Now, whether your brain tries to talk you out of it or not is a different thing, but we always know what we need to do next. Who we need to call, what email we need to respond to, what we need to research. It's like the universe will roll it out for you on a red carpet. This, then this, then this. Your intuition will not steer you wrong. The most important part is that you aren't outsourcing your readiness. You're not outsourcing your certainty. And what I mean by that is that you're not looking to external sources to tell you when you're ready, when you have enough time, when you have enough money, when you're prepared in XYZ ways. Your safety and your security is an inside job. It always starts with you first. And that's why that nervous system regulation is the most important part. And it's going to be important to carry you every step of the way. Now, July 2nd is going to be 1 year since I gave my 30-day notice. August 1st was my last day, and I still don't have it figured out. Like I said, I'm very much in the messy middle, but I trust in my ability to figure it out as I go. And I have. I've created additional evidence now since I've left the agency of my ability to figure things out, of my ability to do hard things and choose your hard. There's this hard versus the hard of a chaotic position that was no longer aligned with the life that I wanted to be living. If you're putting off a major move because of the fear, we need to talk. I would love for you to reach out in the DMs. And if that first step feels impossible because you can't imagine taking on one more thing right now, I've created what I call my rich life audit. This will help you identify the areas where you are unnecessarily leaking time, energy, money, and capacity in ways that you can recover your resources so that you have more to place in the direction of your dreams. This is a tool that I use with all of my one-on-one clients, and I'm making it available to you too. If you want access to the audit, comment audit below, and I'll be sure to send it over. Not only will you get your overall leak score so that you can see the totality of the impact of the areas that you're leaking resources, but I'll personally review your audit and reply with your top 3 leak areas and my recommendations on how to patch them up so you can start living your life with intention instead of on autopilot. I've recorded this part after the fact because there's an important point that I missed in the initial recording, and there's a helpful tool that I utilized as I navigated this transition and to help me make the decision to leave that I think is going to be helpful for you guys too. So first, there is this expectation that when we give ourselves what we want, it's going to feel really good. And that actually couldn't be further from the truth because of the way that we've been conditioned in our society as women, and especially as single moms. We have been told that our wants and needs should come last, that we should prioritize everybody else over ourselves. And when we put ourselves first, it can bring up a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. It feels really uncomfortable. And because it doesn't feel good, our brain wants to offer the thoughts that it must be wrong. If it was right, it would feel good. So therefore, it must be wrong. It's important to recognize that that is your brain doing what she does, that fear-based thinking to keep you where you are. Any form of growth is going to be uncomfortable. And especially when you're starting the habit of giving yourself what you want, It's going to make your skin crawl. It's going to feel wildly uncomfortable, but it gets easier the more you do it. The reality is that you're just not in the habit of giving yourself what you want. Creating new habits is hard. Creating new habits feels uncomfortable. The more you work that muscle, the stronger the muscle's going to get, and it'll start to feel better sooner as you grow the habit. So keep that in mind as your brain continues to try to talk you out of giving yourself the thing that you want. She's going to tell you that you're being irresponsible, that you're being selfish, and the way that that feels in our bodies as women who are naturally givers, that are naturally caretakers, that actually do want to do for others and often at the expense of ourselves. And really where that comes from is a lifelong of prioritizing other people ahead of yourselves. Behaving in different manners, showing up differently for yourself isn't going to feel comfortable at first. It'll get easier the more you do it. And a strategy that really helped me to get clear on this decision wasn't gaslighting myself out of the negative thoughts that I was having and all of the fear that was coming up when I considered leaving the agency, was following down the path of what my worst case scenario actually was. Now, I said earlier that there isn't value in going down every single what if scenario and trying to plan out for everything because, girl, there's just infinite. We couldn't possibly plan for every single scenario. However, when it comes to whatever our brain is offering us as the worst case scenario, in my situation, my worst case was that we were going to end up homeless. It is helpful to go down whatever that very worst case scenario is and just say to yourself, what would I do? What would I do in this situation where I had no income coming in, there was no income in sight, and I was no longer able to maintain our home? What would I do then? Your brain is going to come up with a solution, but so often we spin in the fear and we don't actually name what the thing is that we're the very most scared of. We spin in the ambiguity of the what if. We try to solve for all of the what ifs. We go down this side quest that pulls us further away from giving ourselves what we want because we aren't being clear on what those what ifs are. So I want you to look at what is the very worst case scenario? What if this certain thing were to occur? And then answer that question. What if I wasn't able to generate any income with my business? What then? When you switch from fear to curiosity, your brain is going to come up with solutions. Like I said, we always know the very next step. So my solution to not being able to generate any income in my business, I would get a new job. And what does that mean? That my worst case scenario of getting a new job is the lived experience of the majority of people in the world. The majority of people have a 9 to 5. So my worst case scenario is that I would get a 9 to 5. That actually doesn't sound that bad. The next worst case scenario, we're going to end up homeless. What if getting the new job didn't work out? What could I potentially do then? I know that my aunt isn't going to let us be homeless. She's got a spare bedroom. It's not ideal, but it's not homeless on the street. Do you see the difference? The point here is that we're not gaslighting ourselves out of our fears. We're not just trying to manage our mind and say, no, it'll be okay. Everything's going to be okay. We're actually looking at what is that very worst case scenario and allowing ourselves to be in curiosity and come up with whatever the solution to that would be. The solutions are always inside of us. We always know what we would do. Especially as single moms, we are the most resourceful, the most skilled at a pivot human beings on the entire planet. And this is how single motherhood is our superpower because of our resourcefulness, because of our powerful pivot. And we can utilize those skills and those strategies in our pursuit of creating the life that we're obsessed with. If you're listening to this right now and you're nodding your head because you are sick of making decisions based on fear instead of the vision that you have for the life that you want to be creating, I've opened up 2 private coaching spots this month for successful single moms who want to safely step out of survival mode and into creating the life that they actually want. Pause this audio right now, click the link in the show notes, and schedule a consult with me so we can figure this out together. If you found this helpful, I would love if you'd leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps me get these conversations in front of more people. And as always, I am so glad you're here. I'm endlessly proud of you, and I love you so, so much.